Darkcast Network. The light shines brightest on our indie podcasts.
Hi, this is Kelly.
And this is Jenna.
We're the hosts of ODFM.
That's one from murder.
Each week, we discuss a true crime murder case
and intertwine our unique sense of dark humor.
Each episode relates to a word starting with the letter D.
The stories we tell are serious and true. Our opinions are not.
But be warned, we don't hold back on the details of the case.
Or our inappropriate comments and colorful language.
Join us every Monday on your favorite podcast provider for a new episode of ODFM.
We're on a full ride scholarship to hell.
Hey, Rainbow Warriors. This is my disclaimer. Beyond the Rainbow is a true crime podcast. It's not suitable for young children, and maybe not even for some adults. I tend to swear like a sailor, and I'm kind of proud of that. Listener discretion is advised. Hey there, Rainbow Warriors, and welcome to Beyond the Rainbow, True Crimes of the LGBTQ+. I'm your host, CJ. When you get a chance, please follow me on the socials. I'm on Facebook at Beyond the Rainbow, Twitter, TikTok, and Tumblr as Rainbow Crimes, Instagram as Rainbow Crimes 12, and YouTube as Rainbow Crimes Unicorn Justice. If you'd like to help this one-woman researched, written, recorded, edited, and produced show, please take a look at my merch store under Rainbow Crimes at TeePublic. Another way to show your support is to buy me a cup of coffee. I love coffee. BuyMeACoffee.com/Rainbow Crimes offers listeners a way to support the show without breaking the bank. Other great ways to support the shows you listen to is by leaving a 5-star review. It helps the podcast algorithm gods and goddesses find the podcast. Gaining visibility for often overlooked victims of the LGBTQ+ community is my goal for Beyond the Rainbow. And finally, if you could please tell a friend, pass the word along. Let's get these stories heard. Thank you, my warriors. I am so happy to introduce to you one of Darkcast Network's new sponsors, Batwings and Butterflies. Batwings and Butterflies is an online store offering some really cute and kind of creepy hand-crocheted items. If you're like me and you love to support small businesses, I want you to go take a look at this online shop. There's such fun things, like little hand-crocheted voodoo dolls. You know, I have a few people in mind to use those on. To a big old African flower tarantula, to some really pretty scarves. Also, if you 420 with a water pipe and you're super worried that you're going to hit the corner of it on the table and shatter it everywhere, Batwings and Butterflies has water pipe cozies. It's like a little outfit for your pipe, and it adds some security should you become clumsy with it. All Batwings and Butterflies items are pre-made, unless you request a custom-made item, which they can do too. And if you're someone out there who organizes art trade fairs, you can contact Batwings and Butterflies on Instagram at Batwings and Butterflies or by email at batwingsandbutterflies.shop@yahoo.com. I will also post a link to the Batwings and Butterflies online shop in my show notes. Go check them out, guys. Another link that I'm going to put into the show notes is a link to a survivor story. The story is from a woman who contacted me on Twitter. She asked me to cover her story, but after some counsel from my network advisors, I just don't feel comfortable putting myself in the position of a possible lawsuit. However, I do hate when wealthy people think that they're entitled to do whatever the fuck they want because they have money and because they know people in important places. So I'd love for you to go and read her article. Pass it around if you can. And if you feel comfortable, link it to your social media. It just might save another woman's life. This episode's Missing But Not Forgotten will be reported by my buddy Mike from Brew Crime.
Hey there, Rainbow Warriors. This episode's missing but not forgotten LGBTQ plus person is 31-year-old Cain Nation. Cain is a 6-foot-tall, 140-pound trans woman who went missing from a gas station in broad daylight. Cain was last seen at a Detroit area gas station on April 5th, 2021, around 4 p.m. She saw a female cousin at the gas station and told her cousin she would meet her within the hour at another family's house for Easter dinner. Cain never arrived. Back at home, when Cain lived with her cousin, the cousin said Cain's toothbrush and some clothes were missing. Cain drives a 2016 black Rogue. She has brown eyes and long black hair. A picture of Cain can be seen on the Beyond the Rainbow pod website. Cain was last seen wearing a black 2-piece ankle-length skirt suit with black combat boots, and her hair was in a ponytail. If anyone knows the whereabouts of or has seen Cain, please call the Detroit Police Department's 6th Precinct Investigation Unit at 313-596-5640. Back to you, CJ, at Seabury Studios.
Thank you, Mike. If you haven't listened to Brew Crime has 2 hosts. There's Mike, who's from Canada, and JT from the U.S. Together, they have a great energy, and they're pretty funny. They almost always pick a theme for their episode, and then each tell a story as they drink beer while they do. It's almost like sitting in the basement family room with your best buddies. You're drinking beer and talking crime. Be sure to give Brew Crime a listen, will ya? Whether you love it or you detest it, Disney has had its fair share of scandals and shady happenings. From secret areas located on the grounds of Disneyland, to mysterious deaths on multiple rides, to a baffling disappearance of one of their employees on a Disney cruise ship. Oh, their reputation is not as pristine as they would like everyone to think. And if you're a Disney buff, don't come at me because I'm saying something negative about Disney. Lord knows I've paid my dues to the almighty kingdom of Walt. Even if I did it through clenched teeth while muttering, "They should call this place Disney Line, the crappiest place on earth." Oh, and the food was so bad, so unhealthy, I'd always end up behind someone who was obviously eating there, and the food was tearing up their stomach internally. And then it'd come out externally, and they'd toot. I'd be behind him, of course, and I'd get a whiff and loudly exclaim, "Yep, there it goes, someone's whistling Dixie." And it was almost always usually in the New Orleans place. You know, the area where you could find the Haunted Mansion and my favorite ride, the Pirates of the Caribbean. Don't get me wrong, I've had my share of good times there too. And if I can think of any, I'll be sure to let you know. Joking aside, my Disney experiences aren't the topic of this episode. A Disney cruise ship called the Disney Wonder is. I've never been on a cruise ship. I've always wanted to. That is, until I started to listen to true crime. Now I'm just a little more leery about it. Maybe someday if I ever get myself a life partner, it's something that my life partner and I can do together. But I don't think I'd ever want to go on one alone. I was actually kind of surprised that Disney did have a cruise line. I guess having theme parks all over the world and their hand in a huge movie franchise just wasn't bringing in enough moolah for the dynasty. The case we're going to talk about in this episode takes place on the Disney cruise ship called Wonder. Here's a little information about the Disney cruise ship Wonder. It's still in operation even today in 2022. The trips that it'll be taking this year are trips from Vancouver, British Columbia to Alaska. It's a 2,456 passenger vessel. I'm not sure if that includes the crew members too. The ship can go up to 22.6 knots. Now don't get too excited because that's only about 25 miles an hour. It's 294 meters long, which is 965 feet, and there's multiple decks. I believe this particular one had between 8 and 10 decks. It has 877 cabins, or sleeping quarters. It's not a small ship by any means. In 2011, which is the year that this incident that we're going to be talking about this episode occurred, the Disney Wonder only traveled from the Port of Los Angeles to Puerto Vallarta, and then it went to Cabo San Lucas after a stop in Puerto Vallarta. But we'll get there in just a moment. Since 2011, there's been a few kind of odd incidents that have occurred on this ship. In June of 2020, a Filipino crew member was suffering from chills and fevers. He ended up dying, although no one on that ship tested positive for COVID. His death is kind of a mystery. In March of 2020, 300 crew members tested positive for COVID. 46 of those crew members would end up dying from the virus, and 4 passengers also did. On that cruise, the ship was carrying 935 people. The Wonder was docked in San Diego at the time that this happened. That's pretty bad when 50 people on your cruise die. In October 2017, a 32-year-old male crew member was arrested for embezzling. He took about $260,000 worth of gift cards from the cruise ship. I'm sure that's just pocket change for the Disney empire, but it's the principle of the thing. November 14th, 2016, a 66-year-old woman fell down some steps on the ship. She cracked open her skull. There's no word on whether she recovered or not. In October of 2016, a Spanish male crew member and a UK female crew member hooked up for sex. And I promise you, that's not the odd happening and the reason for the report. The reason for the report is the next day after they hooked up, the man wanted to have anal sex with the woman. And she wasn't about that at all. But he forced it on her. He sodomized her without consent. He raped her. And thankfully he was arrested. Another October 2016 report had a male crew member of Polish descent floating around dead in the water of the shipyard while the Wonder was docked in Spain. In April 2016, the Wonder cruise ship had an outbreak of the norovirus. And I'm sure my friend Jackie at Cause of Death podcast could tell you more about this. But since she's not here with me right now, the norovirus is an intestinal flu-type bug. It infected 131 passengers and 14 crew members. March 1st, 2015, a 56-year-old male passenger was found dead in his room. It's said from natural causes. But boy, that seems awfully young for natural causes. February 27th, 2015, a 38-year-old passenger drowned while the ship was in port. The man drowned swimming back to the shore in the Bahamas. And it looks like there was a 4-year period between February 27, 2015, when the man drowned in the Bahamas, to where our story starts. March of 2011, the disappearance of Rebecca Coriam. And I think by the time we get to the end of this case, you might believe, like I believe, this case is absolute bullshit. The Disney Cruise Line and other crew members that were on it, they know a hell of a lot more than what they were saying. Rebecca went by Becky, and she was a 24-year-old graduate from Hope University in Liverpool. She earned a degree in youth studies. Becky loved kids, and kids loved Becky because she was so playful. She was outgoing and super likable. She was hired by the Disney Cruise Lines to be a youth activity worker. This meant that she was responsible for leading activities for the child passengers. Oh, she wasn't the only one. There was actually a team of youth leaders. Arts and crafts, sports and games, social gatherings, movies, whatever entertained the kids was Becky's responsibility, and she was good at it. Becky was last seen as the sun was rising March 22nd, 2011. The ship was on its way from the Port of Los Angeles to Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. There it would have its first stop before leaving again to Cabo San Lucas in Mexico. At 9 a.m. in the morning of March 22nd, the ship was just off the coast of Mexico. It was almost to Puerto Vallarta. Becky did not show up for her shift. She simply had vanished from the boat. Before she disappeared, however, Becky left a small digital footprint. She did this by means of being seen on video surveillance. And just a reminder, video imaging back in 2011 leaves a lot to be desired. It's kind of grainy and blurry, but it is in color and you can make out that the figure does look like Becky. It's about 5:45 a.m. Becky is in the crew lounge on what is the Disney Cruise Line's internal phone. And I believe this to mean that she can't call outside the ship. She can only connect directly to somebody who's on the ship. Becky visibly looks distraught. At one point, she even holds her face in her hands as though she might be crying. You can see a male crew member walk by her, and as he is, he puts his hand on her shoulder in a comforting manner. It appears that he's checking on her, and then he's no longer seen on camera. Becky is wearing what looks like men's pajamas, which to me I think, she's a lesbian, so what? That's what we wear to sleep in when we're not wearing boxers. Anyway, it did become a point of contention in many articles, and the pajamas seemed to be way too big for her. On the CCTV footage, it looked like she was uncomfortably tugging at them as well. But we're going to put that clothing on hold for a bit. From around 5:45 a.m. to 9 a.m., there is no longer any sight of Becky anywhere. She just poofed into air. From here on out, Disney explains her disappearance by stating there was a storm and a rogue wave came and swept her overboard. Let me give you and Disney a fact check. The weather and waters were extremely calm that morning. There was no storm. Plus, where Disney said she went overboard had a 6-foot protection wall around it. It was the crew swimming pool area, and there were also guardrails. There were no rogue waves reported in that area of the sea either. In order to have swept anyone into the ocean in that area Disney said she was in, the rogue wave would have had to have been at least 100 feet tall. But 11 years later, Disney Cruise Lines is still sticking to that story. And even if Becky did go over, rogue wave or not, Disney failed to follow standard protocol, and that would be to turn the ship around to look for Becky in the water. They reported it to the Navy and the Coast Guard, but then Disney gave them false coordinates of where she might have been in the water. This would make the chances of ever recovering Becky almost non-existent. Another kind of weird thing to me is the jurisdiction for the investigation into Becky's disappearance. It would fall under wherever the ship was registered. This is stupid. The Disney Wonder cruise ship is registered in the Bahamas. It took 3 days after Becky vanished for them to even call the Royal Bahamas Police Force. And then, the force sent exactly one investigator out. And this one investigator, he spent 1 day on the Disney ship, at which time he interviewed 6 crew members out of 950 crew members. How many of the 2,000 passengers did he interview? 0. And then the one investigator concurred with Disney officials. A rogue wave must have taken her. The end. Disney finally contacted Becky's parents. It wasn't an immediate thing. They told her parents the news about their daughter, and then they paid for Becky's parents to fly where the ship was docked in Puerto Vallarta. I'm not sure if you ever really thought about this before, but almost everything Disney does is staged for illusion. It's what they call the magic of Disney. The employees on the cruise ships are crew, and the employees at the parks and even the Disney shops are called cast members. They're actors who put on shows to bring Disney magic your way. It's supposed to be wholesome fantasies and entertainment. where the heroes and the royalty always defeat their villains. Disney staged Becky's parents' arrival as well. They provided a driver and a car to pick the parents up from the airport. The car had its side windows blacked out, keeping Becky's parents literally in the dark. As the passengers were exiting the ship to enjoy their time in Puerto Vallarta, Becky's parents were brought onto the ship at the crew member entrance. And I think this was because they didn't want Becky's parents talking to any of the passengers. They didn't want Becky's parents asking any questions. Becky's parents were taken to a room where they were showed a heavily edited version of the surveillance video. It was the video of the night that Becky went missing. In most all of the CCTV footage, Becky seemed fine. There was not a care in the world for this girl. So it must have been a rogue wave that took her, right? The whole time they were there, Becky's parents felt like they were being treated Disney style, and not in a good way. They felt that everything seemed rehearsed and staged. The captain of the ship came to talk to them. He told them where Becky had been swept off the ship by the wave on Deck 5. He then took them and showed them Deck 5 and the crew swimming pool with the 6-foot fence and guardrails. Becky's parents had a lot of doubts. They were then taken to Becky's quarters. They were given a pair of flip-flops that were found on Deck 5. The flip-flops they were given, they weren't Becky's style, nor were they even her size. Plus, there was a name and room number written on the side of the flip-flop. They were not Becky's. The next day, Becky's parents watched as a makeshift memorial was conducted on Deck 5. Crew members would walk by and lay flowers where Becky was supposedly swept away by the rogue wave. Very shortly after that, Becky's parents were escorted to shore. They watched the Disney Wonder cruise ship sail off towards Cabo San Lucas. And then they were flown back to the UK. All of it was very surreal to them, and none of it made sense at all. They sure as hell did not believe the rogue wave story. And I know that we're left with a bunch of questions, like, what was Becky so upset about? What happened prior to that phone call? Who was Becky talking to? Where did Becky really go? And who, if anyone, is Disney covering for? I don't have all the answers, I'm afraid. There might be a few as we continue, but we don't have them all. There's a multitude of stories out there and possibilities. Friends of Becky's said that when she last came to visit them in the UK, she told them she was fearful for her safety on the ship. Becky was afraid of being sexually assaulted or raped, and yet she went back. Now, we're not here to judge her, though most of us might say, if I thought something like that was going to happen to me, there's no way in hell I'd go back. But we weren't in Becky's position, so we can't judge her. There's some things we do know, though. Becky's parents were dissatisfied with the answers they got from Disney, and rightly so. They hired a private investigator to look more closely into the case. The investigator went and questioned several crew members about Becky. Those crew members said that Disney knows exactly what happened that night. They know exactly what was said on that phone call with Becky. Why? Because they record everything. And everything is on CCTV footage as well. Disney has the tape. And it wasn't the edited version that they showed Becky's parents either. Another crew member was asked about the incident. And their answer was, I know nothing about it. That's the answer I have to give. You know that, right? Even though Disney officials are adamant Becky was swept away by a wave on the area of Deck 5, the private investigator was able to see some of the raw CCTV footage. The timestamp and the area where Becky had the distressing phone call clearly says Deck 1. That's 4 flights of stairs or 4 elevator rides away. If Disney is lying about where Becky disappeared from, you know they're lying about other things. The private investigator believes Becky may have been headed towards the sickbay or a medical unit on Deck 1. and this would have been right after she got off the phone. That's when she disappeared from sight of the CCTV camera. And then Becky was never seen again. Becky also had an American girlfriend on the ship. Her name was Tracy, and she too worked for the Disney Wonder cruise ship. Tracy was a bisexual woman. Tracy was also seeing another crew member at the time, a man named Devin Hyde from Honduras. I believe Devin was a bartender. Around 2 a.m., hours before Becky disappeared, Becky was seen at one of the ship's bars, and crew members who saw her said she was in a great mood. So between 2 a.m. when she left the bar and 5:45 a.m. when she was on the internal ship's phone, something happened. The private investigator was able to obtain the Royal Bahamas police report by the single detective. And here's what the notes of the report said.
American woman in relationship with Rebecca left to get more beer. Came back, and Rebecca and male crew member who was also in relationship with American woman were chatting. She came back, and all three went to the male crew member's room. Male crew member had sex with both. American woman left again to get more beer. Came back, and Rebecca and male crew member had sex.
Everything described in the detective's notes were prior to Becky using the internal phone. The male crew member is Devin, the bartender. And there's notes in the police report that he was laughing and joking around when questioned. The report said that his attitude was inappropriate, and the detective issued him a warning. When Becky's parents were on the cruise ship, Disney returned some personal items of hers to them. Besides the flip-flops that didn't belong to her, Disney gave her parents a pair of Becky's favorite shorts. The shorts had been ripped, which alarmed Becky's parents. Also in the belongings were tickets to Disneyland Paris. Becky had plans to take her parents there when she had a break from work. She was excited to take her parents there. Becky's parents believed she was sexually attacked by the male crew member, and that Becky did not give consent for a threesome. It's their belief that Becky was murdered to keep quiet about the whole situation. In 2017, Becky's bisexual girlfriend Tracy came forward. She gave an exclusive interview to the UK's Sun newspaper. Tracy said that Becky had walked her through a lot of her sexual awakening, and that her and Becky were madly in love. But then Tracy claims Becky intentionally jumped from the deck of the Disney Wonder. She said that Becky was troubled and took drugs, and that Becky had talked about taking her life before. Tracy said Becky used cocaine as a way to deal with being raped as a teenager. Tracy also said she hadn't remained silent for 6 years because she was guilty. She remained silent to protect the image of a friend. I think she's referring to Devin. Tracy said she was tired of reading all the bullshit articles from Becky's parents about what a happy-go-lucky, sports-driven, loving girl Becky was. She feels that Becky's parents are looking for someone to blame, and she feels like they blame her. Well, I'm sorry, but I cannot fault Becky's parents for that, especially if Tracy was one of the last people to see Becky alive. And if Tracy, who by her own admission said Becky was troubled and under mind-altering substances, maybe Tracy should have reported that to the ship's officials to get Becky some help. Here's a little more about what Tracy said. She said she once saw Becky get so emotional, Becky banged her head against the still walls of the ship. And she went on to say that Becky felt like a disappointment to her family because she was lesbian. Now, there were some things that happened right before the ship set sail from the port of Los Angeles towards Mexico. The male crew member, Devin, the bartender, he had been on a break from the ship, but he returned when it was docked in Los Angeles to get ready for the next cruise. Tracy said when he returned, Becky got more upset because Tracy returned to the relationship she was having with Devin. She said one night after they left the port of Los Angeles, Becky had woken her up to tell her she felt like such a failure because she wasn't brave enough to throw herself off the ship. That next night is when Becky had drinks at the ship's bar with Tracy and Devin, and then ended up in Devin's room with the both of them. Tracy claims having a threesome was Becky's idea. In Tracy's account, after the sex, Becky said she should go. Tracy was sleepy and she started to doze on Devin's bed. Becky wanted to go for a walk and she asked Tracy to go with her. Tracy said no, but she told Devin to get something for Becky to wear and to leave the door unlocked for Becky. Tracy said she was drunk and she just wanted to pass out and be left alone. Come morning, when Tracy woke up, she saw that the door was still unlocked and she said she had a weird feeling that something wasn't right. Tracy claims she has nothing to hide and that's why she wanted to do the interview. She's tired of Becky's parents putting the blame on her. Tracy still believes Becky took her own life. If in fact Tracy was passed out in the room all night, who did Becky call? Disney knows. Also, if Tracy was passed out, she can't alibi where Devin was. Devin, the dude who was joking around and laughing through his police inquiry about Becky. As far as anyone knows now, whatever was left on the footage of the CCTV camera or the phone recording has been destroyed. However, there's still people out there who do know exactly what happened to Becky. Me personally, I believe it was foul play. I don't think Becky took her own life. I don't think she was a drugged-out, depressed person at all. Even Tracy's interview doesn't sway me. From everything I've researched, Becky was a pretty well put-together woman, and she was usually happy. Before this last cruise, Becky had called a friend and they had a great conversation. The friend said Becky was in great spirits. They didn't talk about anything too deep, but Becky certainly didn't sound like anything was bothering her. So when I think about some of the actions Tracy mentions that Becky did, like the banging of her head into the ship and threatening to end her life, it sounds like a cry for attention. Tracy implies that both of those things happened either the night Becky disappeared or a day before. Becky was in heartache pain. She wanted Tracy to give a shit, to care about her, to love her more than she loved Devin. Why do I think this? Because I've been there. Becky's banging of her head and threat to kill herself happened the same time Devin came back on board the ship. He took Tracy's attention away from Becky. So yeah, Becky was distraught. She was losing her girlfriend to a guy. Becky was 24 years old. If she was going to take her life because she felt like a failure to her parents for being a lesbian, she would have done so way before the age of 24. It would have most likely happened in those angsty teenage years. But Becky had tickets to Disneyland Paris, and she was excited about taking her parents. And I agree with Becky's parents. There's definitely shadiness upon the cruise line. Crew members said Disney knows exactly what happened. And then there's that crew member that said, I don't know anything. You know that's what I'm supposed to say, right? They know much more. Who did Becky call on the internal Disney phone? If Tracy was passed out as she said she was, could Becky have called Devin? Did Becky ask him to come talk to her? We don't know. I've seen a picture of Devin. Devin's a big guy, and he appears to be very buff, at least in his arms. Not that that has anything to do with Becky's disappearance. I'm just saying he looked very strong. And remember, his pajamas hung on Becky. They were big on Becky. Just food for thought. I'd also like to point out that Becky's credit card, it was used a little after a month from her disappearance. This gave her parents hope that she might still be alive, but then again it could also be a sign of more malicious doings. Unfortunately, there is just no concrete evidence to support the foul play claim. Unless someone in the know actually had a conscience and did the honorable thing and came forward. It's been just about 11 years now. Until someone does spill the magic Disney beans, Becky's not going to find any unicorn justice. Our true crime quickie this episode comes to us from where I used to live, Sacramento, California. Woot woot! And honestly, this murder could have been avoided, but it has so many of the conditions we see over and over again in true crime cases. Number 1, the victim suffered from mental health issues. Sometimes they were severe and sometimes they were mild. Number 2, the victim suffered from chronic homelessness. And number 3, police reform and retraining has to happen globally. Not everyone would call 26-year-old Jordan Zenka the victim, but he was. Yes, he held a knife in a menacing way in a public venue, a grocery store very near where I used to live in Natomas. Natomas is a busy suburb of Sacramento. No, a lot of people would call Jordan an assailant. And truthfully, as long as he held on to that knife in a threatening manner, that's kind of what Jordan was. But he was also a victim. Jordan was an out and proud gay man, but he suffered from mental illness and he always seemed to find himself homeless because of it. In a desperate plea for help, Jordan made himself a GoFundMe page. On the page, he states he was in the process of overcoming addiction, getting over the trauma of past abusive relationships, and that he wished for everyone to be safe and peaceful and never have to know homelessness. On a very dark, wet and rainy December 13th, 2020, early morning off Arena Boulevard, police were dispatched to Bel Air Market. A man had just crashed into the grocery store with his car and he ran inside. The man was wielding a knife. He was yelling that somebody was trying to shoot him. It was Jordan. He was having a mental crisis. He held the knife up to his own throat, and he started to slice at it. A bystander screamed, "He's cutting himself!" Both Sacramento City Police and Sacramento County Sheriffs were very quick to arrive. They were trying to defuse the situation, and they started to talk to Jordan. They told him to put the knife down on top of the stack of oranges. Jordan wouldn't. Jordan walked towards an officer, but then he stopped and he went back to his original spot. The officer again spoke to Jordan. He told him, "Hey, we have all the time in the world, just relax." Had this officer been allowed to keep talking to Jordan, the outcome might have been different. But there were other officers there. Some in tactical gear and armed with beanbag guns, tasers, 40mm sponge impact rounds, non-lethal weapons, and they had shields. They started to approach Jordan. In the video, it looked like maybe 4 officers behind a shield, and they were doing little small steps towards Jordan. At the same time, a canine police dog was at the scene, and it was howling as the incident was going down. I've been trying to imagine how Jordan must have felt in that particular instance. First off, he was already scared that someone with a gun was after him. His visuals were a produce section he was in the store, and he was trapped in there by a bunch of cops. And a lot of these cops weren't just in uniform. They were heavily armed, and some of them wore tactical stuff. There were weapons of all kinds pointing at Jordan. Even the non-lethal weapons looked like lethal ones. Then the sounds. The dog's loud howling, the police radios, the police yelling back and forth to each other, the police yelling at Jordan to relax. They would take him to the hospital. I'm sure all of that would be very overstimulating for a person that didn't have mental issues. But add the mental issues to all of this? I just can't imagine how scared, how confused and disoriented Jordan must have been. He ran towards the officers, and they fired their weapons. Jordan retreated, and then he fell and lay motionless on the ground. It would appear that not all of the officers were firing non-lethal weapons at Jordan. The officers moved in and they saw that Jordan was lying in a pool of his own blood. He was not moving. He was not breathing. Jordan was dead. This to me was a crime. It was a murder. A situation that could have peacefully been resolved had the officers been better trained. Jordan wasn't a threat to anyone at the time but himself. I know Jordan was approaching the officers, but they had shields. They had guns. They could have hit him in the head with one of their tactical weapons. They could have contained him until his mental crisis had worked itself out. They could have contained him until they got the jump on him and restrained him. Sacramento police and Sacramento County Sheriff claimed that the non-lethal weapons weren't working. I don't believe that. I believe they didn't give it long enough. They didn't give it enough of a chance to work. And I believe that the officer who discharged their regular gun was trigger happy and impatient. Unlike the one officer that said, "We have all the time in the world," this officer didn't have all the time in the world. He didn't want this guy who was mentally fucked up wasting his time anymore. And I have another very terrible theory for the motive. Jordan Zenka appeared to look Middle Eastern. There's a very good possibility he was being racially profiled by the officer who shot him dead. I know I am reaching way out with speculation, but part of my job here as a podcaster is to get people thinking, even if what I present to you hasn't been 100% proven. One thing I do know is that Jordan wasn't shot because he was LGBTQ+. Jordan wasn't clockable. You couldn't tell he was gay by his mannerisms or appearance. The police went verbally on record with the media to say that this was a good shooting by all law enforcement agencies involved. And that just kind of blows my mind after seeing the video coverage of it. Jordan's mom filed a suit of wrongful death and excessive force against the Sacramento City Police, the Sacramento County Sheriff, as well as the state of California's Highway Patrol, which I didn't realize they were even a part of this incident. The lawsuit was just filed in August of 2021. It's still in litigation mode. But no matter how you look at this case, there is no and will be no unicorn justice for Jordan. The only way there's going to be any justice for him would be reform of the police, reform of the mental health system currently in place, and to evaluate and assess what our homeless populations need. We know they need homes, but many have mental health issues, and those mental health issues just don't get addressed. These people can't afford homes. How the fuck are they going to afford mental health care or health care of any kind? Rest in power, Jordan. Love you, Rainbow Warriors. Remember, it's not a crime to be gay, unless you're a murderer.